I'm Josh Barrow, host of Left, Right, and Center, KCRW's weekly forum for civilized debate across the political spectrum. Today's news cycle demands more time for deeper analysis, so Left, Right, and Center is now a full hour every week. Subscribe and listen at kcrw.com/LRC.
Here Be Monsters is a show that invites you to explore fear and the unknown.
I saw her face change. I saw her see where I'd pulled my hair out.
Psychological warfare was always considered kind of an oddity, something done by freaks.
On the count of 3, we're literally going to step out of our body. Step out.
You can find Here Be Monsters now at kcrw.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. I guess it's 24 years ago that Strictly Ballroom sort of blew up.
Don't say that, Elvis. Don't say that.
Okay, but I don't say it's going to be even quieter than it normally is on the show. But in the interim, since then, he has done, let's see now, Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, Australia, The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
He's now come to television or to streaming devices near you with the series The Get Down. First of all, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Great, Elvis. It's great to be here.
And I guess the thing I've always been struck by for you is that there's always a generational schism in your work. I mean, and the parents almost always represent the past.
Yes.
I mean, they can't see forward. They almost always represent the past. I mean, thinking back to the parents, Paul Mercutio's parents, that the opening section of Strictly Ballroom, they look like they're from 30 years earlier, like they haven't changed in 30 years. And I wonder for you where that comes from, the idea of generational things being the tensions.
It's very interesting you bring that up because it's both conscious and subconscious, I think. And I try not to be too self-conscious, because if you make what I make, that would get you in a lot of trouble. But it's not just that those parents are generational split. They also specifically say there's only one way to cha-cha-cha. And it's in a rule book, and we wrote the rules. And it's in our rule book. Now, I don't know whether it's conscious or subconscious, but I do notice that not just in my work, but the work itself is always causing that reaction. I'm always facing a reaction where there's the incumbent kind of adult world, if you like, and I'm no kid anymore, but saying, new steps, you're making up your own steps, you're stepping outside the rule book. And I don't know that I seek to do that, but there's no question. I can't deny that it's present, as you're suggesting, thematically, but also in the results of what I make. It's always the same kind of reaction. There's always a bit of, don't go making up your own steps.
Yeah, but I just find it so interesting because, again, when I was watching the first episode of The Get Down and Giancarlo Esposito lays down the law, it could be a scene from almost anything you've done.
Correct. And you know what? I think you can almost cast all of my shows from the same cast. There's always, we joke about it, but there's always a Spanish grandmother, like there is in Strictly Ballroom. There's one in Romeo and Juliet. In Gatsby, you have a character not unlike that. Am I attracted to that? Can I not release myself from telling that? Yes, I know if you were doing the biography of my own journey, I grew up in a small country town. I had a father who was very loving but extremely disciplined. He'd come from Vietnam. And he was also obsessed that we became exposed to or trained in many, many different things.
Yeah, he basically wanted you guys to be citizens of the world because you were in such a small place.
Yeah, we were the Renaissance players of Heron's Creek, We were doing painting, Shakespeare and commando training, which I once said on a show like this and everyone laughed and I just thought, what are they laughing at? But I guess it is odd. But he was very much about the rules. And I distinctly remember getting involved as a young fellow, let's say with a young woman, having a kiss behind the, whatever, and getting busted by the nuns, and Dad saying something like, yeah, but it's the rules. And I said, well, to hell with those who made the rules, and him, cracking a ruler over the back of my hand or something. And I think you're probably right. I think I probably always fundamentally had a thing about pushing the rules or stepping outside the granted construct. And I think that might have something to do with growing up in a very tiny place where you're going I'm not going to accept. I never thought that I would stay in Heron's Creek. I can't think of a second when I ever thought that. I always thought I was going to take my own journey, map out my own path. I always felt that.
Have you read much Aldous Huxley at all? Have you? Because I found myself thinking, even in the doors of perception, sort of like trying to push through. I mean, there seems to me that idea of understanding who you are in the dream state and in the waking world, which is so much a part of Huxley, is the way that your worlds kind of work. These characters almost seem to be dreaming at some point, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I hear, there's a lot of comment, and there's always been commentary that just doesn't get it. They go like, he's a madman. But there's also commentary that have gone, I used to not get it, now I kind of understand it. But beyond that, there's a sort of terminology out there which is kind of my particular brand of magical realism. Now, whether I think that's right or wrong, it's a reasonable way of describing that there's a duality in almost everything I do. I mean, in the Get Down, the adult world is fairly realistic, but clearly, in terms of the point of view of the youth, and this really came from working and collaborating with Flash and Raheem and, Herc. They were all...
these the fathers of hip-hop, basically.
Yeah, and I come from a community theatre background. I come from, actually devising, it was called, in the theatre training I did. And in devising it, the one thing that they all revealed to me was, hey, don't do another outside looking in where the victims, because we saw ourselves, we didn't see negativity, we saw possibility. They saw themselves as heroes. And I've been very buoyed to be reading some very deep thinking, well-written articles recently that put their hands up and say, why can't those characters from the South Bronx have their mythology? Why can't they? The Wild West has been mythologized. Why can't we tell it as they felt it, as opposed to, the factual, outside looking in kind of documentary industry, which is not necessarily true either.
No, that's just another point of view. But it's
Correct.
funny you say the Wild West, because so much of early hip-hop, because it came from the Jamaicans and Tulsa, comes from that.
Right.
I mean, that idea, so much Western slang made its way into hip-hop.
I mean, that's what, having lived in this world now for so long, had the privilege of working closely and collaborating closely with the Founding Fathers, with Crash and Dave. I mean, it's a long, long list, right? And, what was really always amazing to me, when I show my son what the gangs, he thinks that's Mad Max. He thinks, they copied Mad Max. I said, no, Will, who's 10, I said, I'm guessing that George, when he was looking at an apocalyptic world, he made it in the 70s. I bet George went, Jay, look at New York. I mean, these are kids who are dressing like hardcore bikers. They're not running around on Harley Davidsons.
They run bikes or skateboards.
Right. So they're mythologizing themselves, and this idea of them taking on the wild, wild west, we will be cowboys, they're mashing it up. And then at some point it transfers into, instead of just violence, it transfers into battles in dance. And then it transfers into the use of music instead of a gun or a spray can. So, this is, I didn't make this up.
Because there were DJ battles. I mean, the DJs
absolutely
would go back and
there
forth.
were DJ battles. And they weren't doing it for money or fame. They were doing it to battle,
to
win.
There was no money in those days.
To be heroes. They were doing it to be heroes. I mean, there's that beautiful line in Style Wars, not Star Wars, but Style Wars, which is about the graph.
Yes, we know the documentary Star Wars. Yes. I'm a black guy. I know this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Baz. Tell me more about this hip-hop and what you speak.
You'd be surprised how many people think I say, because my accent, they think I say Star Wars, which also opened in 1977, okay? But, there's that beautiful line where that kid says, the mum's going, he thinks he's invincible. It's dangerous down there. And he goes, I'm not doing it for that reason. Mum, well, why are you doing it? He says, because when something like, and obviously I'll be, rewriting this, but when I see my name up there, I am someone. That's why they're doing it.
It really, in its way, was like the Wild West, wasn't it?
I think it was. I mean, I think, and interestingly, out of any period of time or any landscape that is kind of wild, I mean, that song Wild in the Streets, which we use, they tend to be fertile grounds also for pure creativity, pure invention, the immense use of the imagination, sometimes for good and sometimes not for good. In the case of what then became known as hip-hop, it was for good. And I love the way, I think it was Seth who said, he grew up, he's one of our writers,
Seth Fig. Yeah.
Roosevelt, and he grows up actually with Basquiat.
And a playwright. I know Seth's work.
Brilliant. And he said, we used to kind of give each other names and put on characters to protect ourselves against the negativity around us. We wanted to make ourselves superheroes. And he was the one that really pushed that idea. I mean, he was the one that came up with the name Shaolin Fantastic, Lady Killed and Romantic. It's
a treat. I'm being educated about the difference between Style Wars and Star Wars by my guest,
Baz
Luhrmann.
Sorry, Elvis. I blew that. But I mean, honestly, very smart people, not everyone's aware of that documentary. It's seminal. But a lot of people are not. you know.
Well, I guess I just find myself thinking too, and as I was watching that first episode that you directed, in visual terms, I found myself going back to in my head a lot, going back to Strictly Ballroom. I mean, that leap reminded me of that flip that Paul does in that beginning dance. We where everybody's, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And just sort of breaking with tradition in order to saying the rules, almost saying that the rules of physics don't apply to me.
Particularly when it comes to art and creativity. I mean, I think that's true in so many things. You can apply it to politics, to anything. But I think when it comes to creativity and art, the idea that someone has a book and written in it is that this is how you do the cha-cha-cha, fundamentally, and I'm using that as a metaphor, fundamentally there's something corrupt about that. That ultimately creativity has to leap beyond the rules. You know, you need to learn the rules to break them. But, you know, it's funny with my work, I often think if I was asked to draw, like, you know, if Toulouse-Lautrec once was dragged into a madhouse because they thought his paintings were mad, and he was pretty out there. But to get out, he had to just draw. And so he did some beautiful sketches of circuses, and they were realist. Anyone were like, maybe he's not mad. So it's not like I don't know how to draw, meaning I do know how to do, you know, a wide shot and 2 overs. I can do that, right? But and
look at you rolling your eyes as you say it. You're bored just saying those words out loud.
Well, it's sometimes I just think, I should just stick more to the. But I feel like
really, do you actually ever have that thought? You say I should actually do this?
Sometimes because it's exhausting. Sometimes I think maybe that would just be easier. And someone said to me the other day, why do you always pick the hardest road? And I go, well, when I think of it, it doesn't seem hard. I always think this is the easy one. You know, this is
what you're going to do, more likely.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or this has got to be done. It was like the Get Down. In no way. I started 10 years ago with a question. How did such a pure form of creativity get born in the modern era? Just by seeing a photograph, being aware of it. And the more I peeled back the layers, the more I learned. What I learned is what Flash will tell you, which is everyone wants to know about the cake, the 80s, but no one realised what was going on in the birth period, the 70s. And I just began collaborating more and more, getting more and more involved and saying, well, how can I help this get made? And ultimately I had to confront the moment of saying, well, if I don't do it, it won't get done.
So you really weren't going to get it, you're just going to be like in a supervisory capacity?
Well, that's what the thing about the whole new form, and I don't think it's called television, what Netflix offers is that you can provide vision and then a whole lot of other creatives captain it. But it requires what they call a showrunner, and honestly, there is no precedent. It's not a genre piece. It's not a police show. So there's no precedent for how you make a music-driven show that is about music, using music. That's just one aspect.
But also a music-driven piece that's about social realism.
And yes to that, and that's also really about New York City. Like, it's the sheer throw of the piece. Like, it's, you know, its breadth. Like, it really is epic, you know? So it doesn't fit into a box. So when, to get something that doesn't fit in a box made, to get it funded, to captain it, I had to be involved in making up the process with everyone else. And I'm used to that in terms of devising things, but I had to be involved in it.
We'll take a break and I'll learn more about Style Wars from my guest Baz Luhrmann, his new project on Netflix.
There's a show called Star Wars.
Tell me about style. Yeah, this is a treatment. No style here. There's more to come. Stay with us.
Credibility, compassion, integrity, and intelligence. Values KCRW journalists draw on as we confront an ever faster and more fragmented political news cycle. Support what matters, not the distractions. Donate at kcrw.org/join.
Listen to the Rhythm Planet podcast to explore music from all corners of the globe. Brazilian, European, African, and tropical Latin. Rhythm Planet is a state of mind. Listen at kcrw.com/Rhythm Planet or on KCRW's app.
Welcome back. It's The Education of Elvis Mitchell by my guest Baz Luhrmann.
So did you enjoy watching Star Wars?
You know what? It's so revelatory. All those people in that place, that was incredible. And just seeing R2-D2 there too, it's just amazing. His newest project for Netflix is The Get Down. And one of the things you were saying, which is one of the reasons you've made as many films as people would like, is that you can't make something unless you invest yourself in it, can you? I mean, we go back to, you've done Strictly Ballroom had been a play. Yeah. And clearly there had been the influence of Romeo and Juliet on that, which leads to Romeo and Juliet. When I met you, talking about Moulin Rouge, that's been in your head forever. In Australia, there's a lifetime of work. Yeah. And it's the same thing for this. You said 10 years.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. I now accept it. I've tried to do, because it's so attractive. They say, can you just do a little bit of your thing and not 110%? And it isn't a choice. I just can't not give everything to it. Once the train has left the station, is all my life, and it consumes all my life, and it's quite costly, particularly on the personal side of things. But I just feel that I can't not do that, because also what I'm doing usually is not, like, you think about trying to reinvent the modern musical or ask the question, if Shakespeare were making a movie, how might he go about that? You know, these are not genre formulas. So by the very nature, and I'm also involved in every aspect it's curious with The Get Down. Sometimes people say, he's an odd choice. Well, I wasn't chosen for The Get Down. I was trying to answer a question, and it became my life experience, you know?
But why would people say you were an odd choice? Why would you be an odd choice?
Well, I think there's a naive perception out there that somehow every director is hired. I'm never hired. I mean, I never get hired. I am in the fortunate position to be able to think something up and generally get it made.
Has there been a work-for-hire project that you ever came close to doing, and then something just kept you from doing it?
Well, my agent and dear friend always says, why didn't you take Harry Potter when you were offered it the first time?
You were offered Harry Potter?
Well, it came my way. I mean, occasionally, and it was on the cover of Time magazine, and I said, Robert, I'm trying to reinvent the modern musical. Someone else will do that brilliantly, you know. And they did, and I thought the pictures are beautifully made, but I wish it would happen. I really do. I wish it would happen, because I wouldn't have to have the vision. I wouldn't have to spend all the time convincing, cajoling. I wouldn't have to write the text. I could just direct. And that could be refreshing.
But this also begs the question, could you do something that you didn't write? I mean, that's really what, for me, this is about. Could you do something that you didn't create?
Well, I didn't write this project. I collaborated with brilliant writers. I mean, Stephen Adly Guirgis, you know, does have a Pulitzer Prize. I mean, Nelson George knows a thing or two about hip-hop, you know. Art Thomas, by the way, who came from a gang culture, who was swept up into a very smart education, who is a professor at USC. You know, I was privileged to be surrounded by such a diverse and gifted group of writers. And I have a younger guy called Sam and Jackie, and they run the team. And we've developed this unusual, but it works way of doing this. And also, so much of it is music. So one of the writers is Nas. And if you look around, others have had stories like that. There's no question. That's why it was important, in a way, in the end, that, I mean, Nas writes it as narration. But it was important that Daveed Diggs, who plays that character, that it wasn't Nas playing the character. You had to say it's a mythical character. It's how we have, you know, factual characters like Flash that are very accurately rooted in fact. And then we have these mythical characters that weave amongst all of them so that we can visit all these characters. Otherwise, I did contemplate at one stage just going, well, what if I did a biography, say Flash's bio, which should be done one day because he's got a great story. But it becomes just, it does become someone's story as opposed to the city of New York, really, which is what I most want to do.
Couldn't you say Romeo and Juliet is someone's story, or The Great Gatsby is someone's story? I mean, couldn't you say that about those two?
Well, no, because for example, Fitzgerald was brilliant at this. Like, there are historical references in all of those books, but both he and Shakespeare riffed and mashed them up. For example, I did so much research and I worked with such very heavy, high-ended academics on Gatsby, and I can tell you from aerial photographs in the 20s that the gas station location, which is oddly enough where one of our scenes we've shot, you know, out there where the World Fair was? Right in that globe, that's where the gas station was. But Fitzgerald put it in another location, and the reason he did that was he knew these people. So he was borrowing from people he knew. There isn't one house that is the mansion. There isn't one person. He borrows and he makes alloys of characters and alloys of locations. And so does Shakespeare. So, we had to have that freedom. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to tell such an expansive story. How do you, as you're dealing with Flash's journey, how do you get into the Twin Towers politics, for example?
It's the treatment. We're talking metallurgy with my guest Baz Luhrmann. His new project for Netflix is The Get Down. I guess one of the other things, too, that really comes across in your work is that your male characters tend to be kind of unformed. They have ambition, but they're not pointed towards something yet. Yeah. And the women have very specific ideas about what they want from the world. Yeah. And is that autobiographical for you as well?
I certainly know. I have surrounded myself with very strong women. My DP on Australia is glamorous, but really strong. My wife is glamorous, but really strong. And, there might be a bit of a mythology around outside of our circles that no one tells me things as they are, but I'm surrounded by a lot of people, a lot of them women, who tell me just as it is.
But the idea that women represent a kind of an experience that the guys don't have. I mean, we've got Moulin Rouge, certainly Romeo and Juliet. There's an idea of the women be sort of grounded in the way that the male characters aren't.
I know exactly what you mean. There's a kind of naivete to the boys. And the women, Shakespeare didn't write Romeo and Juliet either. He took the story from a John Brown poem, it's Pyramus and Thisbe and so on and so forth. But the fundamentals of that is that, and this is why it was so hard to cast, is that Romeo is a youthful dreamer. He really truly is the embodiment of a young man. But Juliet is wise beyond her years. She's so modern and so mature. So, I think... why am I attracted to that pattern? I don't know. You'd have to put me on the couch, doctor, and spend more time getting to the bottom of that.
Not no time for that. But I just found that to be, and this really feels like it's almost, in its way, kind of a reduction of so much of the things you've done in the past. Yeah. It's almost like all roads led you to The Get Down.
It is true that you will find, and I don't deny that, elements of all those pieces in this show. It's also true that I didn't really set out to do that. It's almost like I am compelled towards those themes, or that in working with everyone as I did, what was very interesting was my job was to find both a realist and a mythic structure to convey this work to the broadest possible audience. I'll tell you something someone read to me, and there's been, of course, so much written about the show. But someone very smartly said something like, because my son is a great fan of, DC Comics, MC, and all the shows. They are the number one genre in our world. They are the Greek mythologies of our time, and they have the widest possible audiences. And it said, you don't realize it, but you've already seen Netflix's newest comic book hero show. It just doesn't have DC or Marvel written on the end of it. And he said, I urge all fanboys of Star Wars and to go out and see. And he wasn't being negative, he was being positive. And I was thrilled. I could tell my 10-year-old, look, even some guys that are going to see Star Wars want to see this. But I think it was very important because it was very true that the way those kids saw themselves were as heroes, and they made themselves into superheroes with music and paint and movement. So my job was to find a construct to do that. So I did. I tend to go do primary mythological structures, and all the other shows I've been made are made from underlying primary myths. You can identify those. If you know anything about Campbell, it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, but that hero's journey, though, is as we're talking about this, so there's almost always a moment in your pieces where a moment feels like it's about to break out into physical violence, and it turns to the dance.
Yeah,
that idea of physical tension and how it's going to release itself.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I was, and I don't want to get too much into the comments, because of the comments I care about is what you actually hear the audience saying, and the way it's been embraced. We've had one thing we do know is it's been embraced. It's in the culture, but every now and then I see you hear a headline, it's West Side Story set in the Bronx, and I'm a bit like, well, what's wrong with West Side Story? Like in the sense that there's another period of time when, here is violence, but it gets expressed through dance. The only thing that's the twist in the Bronx is that it really happened. As Bam would say, it wasn't like he went, okay, everybody dance now, and they danced, right? But by osmosis and over a period of time, Rumbles as Herc says in our show, turn into DJ rumbles. And I'm all right with that.
Clearly you are. My guest, by the way, his good friend Bam would be Africa Bambaataa, is, of course, Baz Luhrmann. We're talking about The Get Down, which is on Netflix now. It's The Treatment. This is the point where I get to ask you to tell the audience what The Get Down is.
Well, The Get Down itself, the word, what it specifically is, I mean, hip-hop's not called hip-hop until like 80, roughly speaking. So it's got another 3 years. They haven't named it. But as Nelson George would tell you, because he's much more articulate about this than I am, and the person who's the most articulate, of course, is Flash, is that in any given record, there were beats in there, and there's what they call the whack part, which is the singing and all that other stuff.
You're waiting for the bridge.
Right. And the B-boys, or the B-boys, used to dance to the beats. And the whole idea was, how could we keep the beat just going and not have the singing? This was the first sample. Right? So the get down was the groove. But very quickly this word, they'd say, oh, that's the get down bit because you get down to it. But very quickly this word went on to mean things like sex. It meant it's cool, it's great, it's, fly, So,
or also a fight.
It was very elastic.
Yes.
You want to get down? And there's a lyric in one of our songs, you got to get down to get up. So it's very elastic, in a good way. And I think, by the way, someone very bright the other day said, why do you think disco crashed? And, punk has its influences and does go on, but that hip-hop became so pervasive. And my only observation there is, one, hip-hop has multiple strands. It's the music, it's the poetry, it's the beats, it's the poetry, it's the art, it's the attitude, it's the movement, but also the very nature of the form. It's so elastic. It's so constantly transforming, and some people can be critical of what is called contemporary hip-hop now and so on and so forth, but it evolves. And that's why the English language, as opposed to other languages, has become dominant too, because it absorbs other languages and it evolves. So anything that's prepared to cross-fertilize actually gets stronger.
Also, the idea of the energy of youth versus the institutional setting of older people. Basically, these are people who put down roots versus people who haven't had a chance to find them yet. I mean, that's really, again, we look at all these pieces you've done. Yeah. It's really a big part of this too, isn't it?
It's somehow, I cannot escape it. And maybe it's because of us, I honestly, even though part of me just goes, look, it's time to just disappear. Because
sorry, what?
Well, because the work is so absorbing. Like there are, we have children, and at some point Shakespeare just sort of retired on a farm and disappeared. But there's another part of me that feels like I haven't even got going. I've done nothing. Like I look at what constitutes being 50, and I just don't feel like that. So I feel like somehow I haven't been able to let go of this thing about youth versus the incumbent. But what I think is true, more importantly, there are a lot of young people who are even in hip-hop who didn't know about that time. And I think to hear Flash or Nas or Herc say younger people are now going, really? I didn't understand that. I think that makes the whole journey worthwhile.
Oh, sure. But I guess maybe one of the reasons you might have heard that people said, why you is, they're just,
I understand that.
Yeah, but exactly. A lot of people think, well, why is another white guy doing this?
Yeah, believe you me, I didn't set out to be that guy. And I'm not even American, even though I live in New York.
I would never guess between Star Wars and Style Wars that you weren't American.
Well,
you didn't give yourself away on that one at all.
Two great American iconic films that you could mash up. And in fact, I think I might have had a good go at it. But you know what? I'm not French either. And yet I burrowed into Moulin Rouge. I'm not American, and Gatsby would have to be one of the primary texts of the American psyche, if not the primary text. Why would I go and get amongst that hornet's nest? It's not like I don't have choices, I do. And I think it's a good question. I have often gone, oh, really? But there just came a point where I contemplated it, and I talked with everyone, and I just felt it was the right thing to do. And in my world, with all the collaborators, they are a bit like, you're not going to abandon us, are you? Or not continue with the show when things got tough, And I just didn't feel I could do that.
Well, Tom, you're welcome to come back here anytime you want. It's been a long time.
I always feel comfortable to chat.
Well, thank you so much. My guest.
And check out that film, Style Wars.
I'm writing this down. Style Wars. I'm writing this down. My guest who's educated me about everything 70s is Baz Luhrmann. His newest project with Netflix is, of course, The Get Down. Recording engineer here at NPR in New York is Jeannie Montalvo-Lucar. The show is mixed by Kat Yor. It is edited by Blake Veit, who's the associate producer. I have no style. It's The Treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.